Destiny 2 is full of terrible decisions, but putting the game on PC is the one good decision that stands out. Destiny 1 is the only AAA multi-platform game in the past few years I can think of that never made its way onto PC, which was odd. It seemed like the perfect fit for the platform. It was clear from the reveal event that Bungie intended to take PC seriously as a platform, but I'm still shocked by the amount of care that clearly went into making this version of the game. It's not without its faults, and others as well as myself have certainly been encountering some minor hiccups, but it managed to exceed my expectations and then some. The graphical settings include everything I like to have access to: FOV, motion blur, and even separate sensitivity configuration for aim-down sights and hipfire. Destiny 2 is also one of the best ultra-wide games I've ever played. Everything you would want to scale to the sides does, including cutscenes. Really impressive stuff when you consider that this engine was initially made with only console in mind. The only problem I have with the settings is the anti-aliasing. You can choose between FXAA and SMAA, both of which are not very good. FXAA has less shimmering at the cost of blurring every texture in the game, and SMAA leaves the textures intact with slightly more shimmering. Either way, the aliasing is noticeable, even at higher resolutions. A super sampling option is included in the settings, and that could help to remedy the problem, but with super sampling comes a significant loss in performance. It might be a viable option for 1080p players with extra GPU power left to spare, but for me, it's not an option. It's a shame, because aside from the anti-aliasing, Destiny 2 on PC is a great looking game. But perhaps more importantly, they've managed to reach a commendable balance between visuals and performance. Everyone I know, including myself, has been getting good performance on a wide range of hardware. At 1440p ultra-wide with the 1080 Ti, I was getting around 80 to 90 FPS most of the time. The frame rates can vary depending on what you're doing, but the open world areas, particularly during crowded public events, seem to be the main cause of frame rate dips. This did not come as a surprise to me, since public events also caused noticeable frame rate dips on console. Otherwise, if you have a reasonably modern setup, then you should have no issues running this game. All of these PC features and good performance would be for nothing if the gameplay didn't hold up. Fortunately, the transition from controller to mouse and keyboard is near perfect. The game instantly becomes easier when you don't have to fight against the frame rate and joystick auto-aim, but they've still somehow managed to retain that core Destiny feel. Unlike The Division, the guns actually feel different from one another and have a weight to them. The one big change is the severe reduction in recoil when using a mouse. It's to the point where certain guns that weren't useful on console are useful on PC. Bungie has stated that they have no plans on balancing the PC version separately, but I'd bet that that will change eventually. Finally, I do have to touch on those hiccups that I mentioned earlier. I had the game crash a handful of times with an error that said the game needed to be scanned and repaired. I humored the message and scanned every time, only to be told that no repairs were needed. Eventually, I noticed that a particular area in Nessus was constantly causing the crash, so I decided to reinstall the game. After doing that, I never encountered the problem again. I've read that this problem was related to AMD processors that were below the minimum specs, but I have an Intel 4790K. My guess is that I unintentionally induced this problem by preloading the game and then reinstalling an older version of Windows before the game came out. No one else I've talked to personally has had this problem, but since it did happen to me, I had to mention it. If you played Destiny back in 2014, dropped it, and then came back with Destiny 2, you'd think that a lot has changed for the better. What you wouldn't know is that most of the major differences between Destiny 2 and Destiny 1 came in the Taken King expansion. Things like cutscenes with dialogue, the infusion system, and 3 subclasses for all classes found their way into the game in 2015. It's a good thing that they stuck around, because those were improvements that made the game better, but for whatever reason, Bungie also thought it'd be a good idea to remove features that used to be in the game. In Halo 3, Bungie introduced the veto system. It allowed players to pick which map and game mode they wanted to play next, rather than leaving it up to random chance. This is something that is now commonplace in games like Battlefield and Call of Duty. Oddly, Bungie opted to not include this system in Destiny 1's Crucible, but at least each playlist back then had only one game mode. In Destiny 2, that's not the case. Bungie thinks that they know best and decided to remove playlists for specific Crucible modes. Now there's only 2 playlists, Quick Play and Competitive, which means you'll likely be stuck playing game modes that you don't like. The lack of mode selection is by far the most infuriating and noticeable change, but there are plenty of small fuck-ups as well. In Taken King, they introduced strike-specific loot, which was one of my favorite additions. It was certainly a grind, but it was at least straightforward and resulted in some of the coolest looking items in the game. In Destiny 2, there is no such thing as strike-specific loot. Remember customizable class trees? I do too, but in Destiny 2, they don't exist. Happen to like 3v3, 6v6, or free-for-all PvP? You're out of luck. I could keep going, but we'd be here for a long time. The one improvement that Bungie spent a ton of time boasting about was the allegedly improved story mode. After being forced to endure it 4 times, I cannot for the life of me understand why they brought so much attention to it. While it's superior in presentation, the campaign here is worse in just about every regard compared to the Taken King, which itself was barely mediocre. This story feels like a formality rather than something worthwhile. I mean, fuck it. Why even pretend to have a story at this point? We learn nothing about the characters and world, and this time around, the main bad guy of the story isn't even in the raid. As I sat through multiple cutscenes of the speaker without ever being told what exactly the speaker even is, I had to wonder if this terrible excuse for a story was incompetence or by design. I have a hard time believing it's the latter, since even Call of Duty, something that panders to the lowest common denominator, consistently delivers campaigns that run circles around what Destiny has to offer. At this point, I think it's time to give up all hope of Destiny ever having a good or even passable story. Once you're done with that 6 to 7 hour long chore, you'll hit level 20 and start your journey to light level 305. So what do you do to get to that point? Well, to get to an adequate level to do endgame content like the raid or trials, you'll spend your time farming public events which are finally useful. In typical Destiny fashion, one thing becoming good means another thing must become bad, and that thing this time around are the strikes. The strike playlist is ostensibly useless now, as it gives similar payout to public events which take a fraction of the time. After you've farmed enough public events to reach 275 light, you're ready to take on the raid, trials, and nightfall. In Destiny 1, max level was mostly reserved for those endgame activities, but in Destiny 2, you can reach max level rather quickly without ever touching them. In fact, the things that were most beneficial to reaching max level for me were not the high-level activities, but instead the weekly milestones that just about any player can easily complete. What this led to was me reaching max level with 3 resets worth of raiding and weekly milestones on just one character. This problem is further compounded by the new clan system, which gives out a ton more powerful gear rewards per reset. I personally think that it's odd to have max level be achievable through means other than endgame activities, but I can at least understand the logic behind the decision. What I cannot understand is why it's possible to get raid and trials gear without playing a single second of either. Those activities exist so that hardcore players can earn exclusive items and then show those items off as trophies. Now that anyone in an active clan can conceivably get these rewards on a weekly basis, are they even special anymore? The worst part is how this screws over solo players even more. Solo players already don't have in-game matchmaking for the raid or trials, and on PC there's no general chat for some reason. If you happen to be a solo player that doesn't have a clan, you're at an inherent disadvantage compared to everyone else that does. While the rewards might not be as special anymore, the raid is still the most unique content that Destiny has to offer. This time around, they attempted to shake things up by having only one boss. The other 3 encounters are more puzzle-like in nature. This sounds really cool in theory, but in practice, it's tied with Crota for being the easiest raid in Destiny. In a lot of the previous raids, if one person failed their job, it was game over. In this raid, I had runs that were complete disasters and we still managed to beat it. However, this raid does not disappoint with its visuals. The individual encounters feel a little small, but the hub area feels grand and vast. The opulent gold trim that lines every square inch of the environments looks unlike anything that has ever been seen before in Destiny. But there's just something missing. I feel like an encounter or two could have been beefed up a bit. Specifically, the Gauntlet encounter could have been better if it had a second phase with a boss. Overall, this is still a decent raid even if it doesn't live up to the grand adventure that was King's Fall. I would talk about Trials, but it's easier to just talk about Crucible in general, since all of Crucible has been turned into Trials. All game modes are now 4v4, and in 99% of games, you'll get a super only once. Add into that the removal of special weapons and drastic changes to grenade damage, and you're left with a Crucible that feels more like a Soldier 76 only match of Overwatch than it does Destiny 1. You might have heard that Crucible is entirely different on PC, and that can be true sometimes. For the first 2 or so days, people played more aggressively, like the first game, but I eventually saw that style of play disappear before my eyes as players gravitated towards the Mida multi-tool, team shooting methods that are so ingrained in the console game right now. You'll sometimes get a game where people aren't playing like that, but the second you go up against a team that does, it feels like you're physically locked into that style of play. There is presumably a chunk of the player base that enjoys this trialsization of the entire Crucible, but I am not one of those people. For me, Crucible doesn't feel unique anymore, which is a shame, since that's one of the things that I always thought Destiny had going for it. Unless Bungie decides to radically rebalance the game, this is likely the way Crucible will remain for the foreseeable future. A point of contention for PC players has been the inclusion of aim assist for controllers. Out of curiosity, I plugged in my Xbox One controller and played a few rounds of Crucible. With it, I was able to nail perfect headshots with ease, playing just as I would on console. While this might seem like something that could be heavily abused, it's really more of a half a dozen of one, 6 of the other scenario. While I was able to get those Mida headshots with ease, there were other moments where I was at a distinct disadvantage and losing situations that I would have won with mouse and keyboard. A lot of people have been bringing up the Zim 4 adapter, which allows mouse and keyboard to be recognized as a controller, but this setup has its own distinct disadvantages. When I was playing Trials on PlayStation, I noticed that a longtime friend had been playing a lot better than I remember him playing in the past, and it turned out that he had bought one of these adapters since the last time I played with him. He then proceeded to tell me that setting it up and getting the sensitivity right for the mouse was very difficult. The important thing to note here is that even on console, he was still capable of losing to controller players. The thing that has to be taken into consideration on PC is that the game does not grant that severe reduction to recoil for these potential Zim users, since their mouse and keyboard is being recognized as a controller. The adapter itself is also messing with the sensitivity of the mouse and adding an extra layer of latency to your input, and at that point, any potential gains probably diminish. Long story short, I don't think that this Zim thing is much of an issue theoretically, and in practice, it's highly unlikely you'll run across players using it anyway, since it's $125 and a lot of effort. Finally, we end with the topic of weapons. Collecting legendary and exotic weapons has always been the main draw of Destiny. Exotics are now situational at best and absolutely useless at worst. Destiny 1 also had situational exotics, but there were just as many exotics that changed the way you played in a fun, engaging way. I can't name a single exotic that gets me excited in the way that guns like Hawkmoon, The Last Word, and Vex Mythoclast did. This is one of the big problems that Destiny 2 has right now. Those exotics were the reason I would anticipate Reset Day, but now I don't really care if I even get them. They decided to include only 3 exotic weapon quests, and one of these weapons has been in the game since 2014. That gun is the Mida multi-tool. It's bad enough that they made a Year 1 gun an exotic quest, but to then pick the Mida? Why? While it's good, it's also the least exciting gun on the planet. There are legendary guns that are more exciting. The other 2 quest weapons are quite bad at the moment, so they aren't even worth talking about. The quests themselves are uninspired as well. Where's the Black Spindle or Outbreak Prime style hidden quest? Then there's the topic of legendary weapons. Perks on all legendary weapons are now static, which, for better or worse, eliminates the endless grind that was possible before. Additionally, weapons only have 1 active perk on them, meaning that killer combinations like Firefly and Outlaw are no longer possible. This is one of the big changes to the game that makes you feel a lot less powerful, even though everything has been balanced around that decrease in power. Everyone and their mother has their own ideas on how to improve this, but my realistic idea is to keep vendor weapons, that is Crucible, Vanguard, and Factions, static, and make Foundry weapons rollable. I would say that there are about a dozen or so legendary and exotic weapons that I found to be worthwhile, and 2 of them can be obtained as guaranteed drops during the campaign. What this means is that there's even less reason to stick around and grind for desirable weapons. I could spend a whole lot more time telling you about other issues that I didn't mention, things like the token system, lack of endgame activities, but I wouldn't be saying anything new. If you're a console player and you're considering the switch to PC, it's completely worth it. The mere act of switching from console to PC improves the game significantly, but that doesn't change the shortcomings of the game itself, which makes it hard for me to recommend this game to a newcomer. I'm desensitized to the story mode being terrible and just powering through it to get to the good stuff, but if you're a new player, that's going to be a big barrier of entry. This is also a game that lives and dies by how many people you have to play it with, even more so now with the lack of endgame incentive to play. In its current state, this is a 6 out of 10 game to me, and that score would probably be lower if I was reviewing the console version of the game, which does not see the technical improvements that PC does. Destiny 2 translates over to PC in a spectacular way, but the content just isn't there to back it up. With Curse of Osiris coming so soon in early December, which, by the way, is not going to be delayed on PC, I don't think it's reasonable to expect massive changes to the game. Bungie has a good foundation on PC, but their relationship with the community is at an all-time low. If you played Destiny 2 on PC, let me know what you thought, and until next time, thanks for watching.